He was a
Thank you for
stranger,
everything. We should
just
get
back
going.
from a rescue mission in Afghanistan,
travels,
who
dear.
walked into a restaurant and saw a
I'm
widow
really gonna
in
miss
her
seeing you around
70s.
here.
But when a gentleman humiliated an old woman, a quiet stranger stood up. A man with a scar, a calm voice, and a German
Your
shepherd by
grandmother
his
must be
side.
so proud
They
of you
arrested
guys
him,
now.
laughing as
Look
they
at what
trapped
a
his
big
dog with a
man you
baton
turned out to
and
be.
took him to the station. Follow us, and if this story touches you, subscribe now for more stories of justice, loyalty, and redemption. The morning fog drifted low across the Columbia River, soft and pale like smoke from a dying fire. The world seemed suspended between silence and breath, between the weight of memory and the promise of something yet unseen. Jack Morgan guided his old Ford F-150 along the winding road that hugged the river's edge. The truck, sun-faded and dented, carried the scars of long service, much like the man who drove it. Jack was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that looked carved rather than born. His dark hair was cropped short, streaked at the temples with silver that didn't belong to his age, but to experience. A faint scar cut from his jawline to the corner of his mouth, the silent remnant of a knife that had come far too close in a desert, far too hot. His eyes were a striking gray blue, cold when they measured distance, warm when they remembered loss. Beside him sat Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a coat of deep sable and gold, his fur still thick despite the early autumn chill. Rex wasn't just a dog, he was a soldier, with muscle like coiled steel and eyes the color of old whiskey. His left ear bore a small notch from a fragment of shrapnel in Kandahar, a permanent mark of loyalty earned the hard way. When the wind brushed through the cracked window, Rex lifted his head, nose twitching at the scent of pine, water, and rain. He made a low chuffing sound, the kind of gentle exhale he only gave when the air didn't smell of danger. Jack reached down and scratched the dog's neck absently. "We're almost there, buddy," he murmured. His voice was roughened gravel, the kind of tone that came from too many commands shouted through gunfire and sandstorms. He had been on the road for 2 days, heading north toward a small cemetery near Astoria, where a man named Sam Keller, his teammate, his brother-in-arms, had been buried 3 years ago after a rescue mission went wrong. Sam had taken a bullet meant for Jack, and the guilt still followed him like a shadow that refused to lift. The sign appeared out of the mist. Silver Fork Diner, letters chipped, neon, long dead. The place looked as if it had been built when cars still had fins. Jack slowed, pulling into the gravel lot where weeds grew between the stones. The diner's large windows were fogged, but through the glass he could make out the dim glow of yellow light. "All right, let's get you some water," Jack said softly. Rex perked his ears and hopped down as soon as the door opened, landing with the grace of a trained operative. Together they moved in sync, the rhythm of their steps so practiced it looked rehearsed, a man and a creature bound by something wordless. The bell over the door chimed as Jack pushed it open. The interior was small, warm, and smelled faintly of bacon grease and old coffee. Booths lined the windows, the leather seats cracked with age. A jukebox in the corner blinked weakly, its glass scratched by time. Behind the counter stood a woman, thin, small-boned, her back slightly bent, but her movements deliberate. Martha Wilkins looked to be in her early 70s. Her silver hair was pulled into a neat bun, though a few loose strands framed a face lined with the soft wrinkles of someone who had lived through more than she ever spoke about. Her eyes were pale green, gentle but alert, the eyes of a person who had known grief yet still chose kindness. The simple cardigan she wore was mended at the elbows, and the apron tied around her waist was clean, though worn to softness. "Morning, hun," she said, her voice tremoring slightly but pleasant. "Coffee's hot. You and your friend looking for breakfast?" Jack smiled faintly. "Just coffee for me, ma'am, and some water for him, if that's all right." He nodded toward Rex, who sat obediently by the door, tail sweeping the floor once in quiet greeting. "Well, ain't he handsome?" Martha said, her eyes lighting with warmth. "German Shepherd, right? I had one just like him when my husband came back from the war. Smartest thing on 4 legs." "Vietnam?" Jack asked gently, recognizing the distant weight in her tone. She nodded. "Yes. He made it home, but the war never really left him." Her gaze drifted toward the window where the river mist pressed against the glass. "I guess I kept this place going so I'd still have something of him left." Jack's throat tightened. He understood that kind of devotion, the kind that lived in quiet rooms and framed photographs. He took a seat at the counter, choosing a stool that let him face both the door and the window. Old habits never died. Martha poured him a steaming mug, the aroma grounding him for the first time in days. As he wrapped his hands around the cup, his eyes wandered across the diner. On the corkboard near the kitchen window, pinned between faded newspaper clippings and community flyers, was a bank notice. The red letters read, "Final warning. Foreclosure pending." Jack felt a small shift inside his chest, a familiar ache of helplessness. He looked back at Martha, who was carefully stacking plates near the sink, her hands trembling from arthritis. She was humming softly, a tune too old to name, too sad to ignore. He cleared his throat. "You run this place alone?" "Oh, it's just me these days," she said, with a small smile that was brave but tired. "Used to have help, but folks don't stay long when there's easier jobs in town. Most people don't stop here anymore. Guess I'm just too stubborn to close up." Her laugh was short, and it faded quickly. Jack studied her quietly. She reminded him of the medics he'd met in the field, gentle souls holding broken bodies together with shaking hands and sheer will. The kind of people who saved others but couldn't always save themselves. Rex, lying by the counter now, rested his head on his paws and gave a soft sigh. Martha chuckled. "He's got good manners. I bet he's seen a lot." Jack took a slow sip of coffee, staring into the dark surface as if it might hold an answer. "Too much," he said finally. "Both of us have." The door creaked open as the morning breeze slipped inside. A mailman entered briefly, nodded to Martha, and dropped off a small stack of envelopes. She thanked him and returned to her routine. Jack caught the moment when she opened one letter. Her smile faltered, then steadied again. It was the same expression soldiers wore right before they lied to their families. "Everything's fine." "Bad news?" Jack asked carefully. "Oh, just the bank reminding me they still exist," she said, forcing cheer into her tone. "Don't you worry about it, dear." He didn't press, but when she turned to refill the coffee pot, he rose instinctively to help. Her hand shook slightly, and the tray she carried tilted. Jack caught it before it fell, steadying her. Their eyes met briefly, hers surprised, his calm. "You've got reflexes," she said, half laughing. "Occupational habit," he replied. It was then, as he set the tray down on the counter, that his gaze caught the official seal on the paper pinned behind the register, the foreclosure notice, stamped with today's date. Something about that red ink felt cruel, almost obscene in the small, quiet dignity of the place. Martha noticed his eyes linger. She sighed. "Guess you saw it. I try to ignore it, but it's hard when it's staring you down every day." "Can't they give you more time?" "Time's money," she said softly, "and I ran out of both a while ago." She gave a weary smile. "But don't you go feeling sorry for me now. I've had a good run, just not ready to let it all go yet." Jack nodded slowly, something heavy stirring in his chest. He'd spent years losing comrades, homes, brothers. And now, halfway across the world from where those losses began, he was looking at the same quiet surrender in the eyes of a woman who reminded him of everything decent he was fighting to protect. He wanted to say something comforting, but words had never been his strength. So he simply reached into his jacket, pulled out his wallet, and placed 2 bills on the counter, far more than the cost of a cup of coffee. Martha looked at him in protest. "That's too much." "Consider it a veteran's discount," he said, finishing his drink. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "You're a good man, Mr. Morgan," he said. "Jack Morgan." "Well, Mr. Morgan," she said, "you're welcome here any time." Jack glanced down at Rex, whose ears twitched as if in agreement. The mist outside was beginning to thin, revealing a glimpse of the wide gray river beyond. For a fleeting second, Jack felt something close to peace, something fragile but real. As he stood to leave, Martha called after him, "Drive safe out there. The road along the river gets slick when it rains." Jack paused at the door, the bell chiming softly as he looked back. "I've seen worse storms," he said with a faint grin. Then he stepped into the fading fog, Rex trotting at his side. Behind them, through the diner window, the old woman watched the pair disappear into the mist. 2 weary travelers carrying more ghosts than luggage. And though Jack didn't know it yet, the next time he'd see that diner, it wouldn't be just for coffee. It would be the beginning of a battle no gun could win. The fog had burned away by noon, leaving behind a dry, brittle sunlight that glared off the windows of the Silver Fork Diner. Inside, the small cafe had returned to its usual rhythm. The hum of the ceiling fan, the clatter of a spatula on an iron pan, and the distant song of a radio struggling to hold its signal. Jack Morgan sat in the corner booth, his back to the wall, watching dust drift lazily through the warm air. Rex lay by his feet, the German shepherd's breathing slow and steady, his chin resting on his paws. For the first time in weeks, Jack had allowed his mind to loosen its grip on vigilance. That fragile peace would last less than 10 minutes. The deep growl of an engine cut through the air outside, sharp and impatient. Jack's eyes flicked to the window, the instincts of a soldier returning like muscle memory. A black Range Rover, gleaming and spotless, rolled into the gravel lot, tires spitting stones. When the door opened, the man who emerged looked like he'd stepped out of a glossy magazine more than a small town. Evan Briggs was in his late 20s, tall but soft in the way of someone who had never lifted anything heavier than a golf club. His blonde hair was sculpted to precision, his white shirt crisp beneath a navy blazer, and his loafers gleamed as if afraid of dirt. A heavy gold watch clung to his wrist, catching the sun in deliberate flashes. His face, handsome at first glance, carried the slight puffiness of too much privilege and too little consequence. His smile was sharp and practiced, the kind of expression that had opened doors his character would never have earned. Evan walked toward the diner with an arrogant ease, swinging his car keys like a toy. Inside, Martha was arranging sugar jars on the counter, humming softly to herself. The bell chimed as Evan pushed open the door with unnecessary force. He didn't remove his sunglasses, though the light inside was dim. "Afternoon," he said flatly, his tone not a greeting, but a declaration of presence. Martha looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. "Can I help you, sir?" "You can," he said, stepping closer to the counter. "Name's Evan Briggs. I'm here on behalf of Briggs Development. My father owns the property this lovely little building sits on." Her face paled, the color draining as recognition settled. "I've already told your father I'm not selling," she said gently, her voice wavering between fear and dignity. Evan removed his sunglasses then, revealing pale blue eyes that held no warmth, eyes that had learned early how to mock compassion. "Yeah, I read that letter. Thing is, my dad's done waiting for your sentimental nonsense. The paperwork's ready. All it needs is your signature." He pulled a folded document from the inner pocket of his blazer and slapped it on the counter with a thud. "You sign. We wire you enough money to buy a nice little condo in town. You don't. The bank does what banks do." Martha stood straighter, though her hands trembled slightly. "This diner's been here for 50 years. My husband built it when he came home from Vietnam. It's all I have left of him." Evan smirked, leaning closer, his cologne thick and expensive. "Then you'll be happy to know it's going to be part of a new resort. Wilkins Point. Has a nice ring, doesn't it? You'll be famous." Jack had been silent until then, listening, watching. The tone in Evan's voice, the oily blend of entitlement and cruelty, hit something raw in him. He set down his mug and rose from his seat. Rex's ears flicked up, golden eyes alert but calm. Jack approached quietly, his presence filling the small space like the shift in air before a storm. "That's enough," he said, voice low, steady. His gray-blue eyes met Evan's, unreadable but firm. She said, "No." Evan turned, blinking as if surprised anyone had spoken to him in that tone. His gaze swept over Jack's plain gray t-shirt, the calloused hands, the posture that spoke of precision and discipline. "And you are?" "Just a customer," Jack replied, "but I don't like watching someone get pushed around." Evan's smirk returned, though thinner now. "A hero, huh? Let me guess. Some ex-cop? Town mechanic? Maybe a fisherman?" Jack said nothing. Rex stood now, silent beside him, tail still but muscles coiled, a warning in the air. Evan's eyes flicked to the dog and back. "You bring that mud in here too? How quaint. Look, friend, this is business. The old lady's sitting on prime riverfront and you're drinking her coffee. Maybe mind your own." "She said no," Jack repeated. His tone hadn't changed, but it carried weight, a quiet authority that reached deeper than volume ever could. Evan's nostrils flared. "You think you can talk to me like that?" he snapped, stepping forward. "You have any idea who I am?" Jack's lips twitched into a faint, humorless smile. "I think I do. You're the kind of man who's never heard the word no without calling a lawyer." Martha gasped softly. "Please don't." But her voice was lost in the tension that thickened the room. Evan's anger broke through his mask of civility. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick wad of bills, and tossed it onto the counter. The money fanned out, some of it slipping to the floor, fluttering near Martha's feet. "There, that's what this dump's worth. Go ahead, pick it up. Might be the last cash you see before the foreclosure." For a long second, no one moved. The air seemed to hold its breath. Then Martha, with slow dignity, bent to gather the fallen bills, not to keep them, but to remove their ugliness from her floor. Jack stepped forward, standing between her and Evan. His voice dropped lower, each word deliberate. "You're done here." Evan laughed, but the sound cracked, under pressure. "Done? You don't make the rules, old man." Jack didn't move closer. He didn't need to. "You should leave." Rex let out a quiet growl, not loud but deep, a vibration that crawled under the skin. His amber eyes locked on Evan's face, unblinking. Evan's confidence faltered. He looked from the dog to the man, two living embodiments of control and contained violence, and realized dimly that he might be out of his depth. He stepped back, pointing a trembling finger. "You'll regret this. You and your little army dog. The cops in this town work for my family. You just picked the wrong fight." Jack held his stare unflinching. "Then maybe it's time someone picked one." Evan sneered, snatched his sunglasses from the counter, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Outside, gravel spat from his tires as the Range Rover peeled away, leaving a cloud of dust and the faint echo of tires on asphalt. Inside the diner, the silence was absolute. Martha's hand shook as she pressed the crumpled bills back into a pile and shoved them toward the trash bin. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You shouldn't have gotten involved." Jack shook his head. He was already involved the moment he tried to take what's yours. Martha looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You don't know the Briggs family. They own half this town. They can make people disappear, make problems go away." Jack took a slow breath, glancing at Rex. The dog sat once more by his feet, calm now, but alert. "I've dealt with worse," Jack said quietly. Martha hesitated, then sighed. "You sound like my husband used to. Always thought courage could fix everything." "Sometimes it just needs to start something," Jack said. She smiled sadly, turning away to refill the coffee pot, though her hand still trembled. "I wish I believed that." Outside, the sound of the Range Rover faded into the distance. Jack returned to his booth, Rex following closely. The soldier's eyes lingered on the window, watching the dust settle over the gravel where the tires had spun out. He could almost feel the coming storm, the kind that started not in the sky, but in people. Rex looked up at him, head tilted slightly. Jack reached down and stroked the dog's ear. "Stay sharp, partner," he murmured. "I think we just made an enemy." The German shepherd's tail thumped once, soft but sure, like the beat of a war drum waiting in silence. And somewhere far down the river road, Evan Briggs was already on the phone, his voice venomous with outrage, sowing the seeds of the trouble to come. By late afternoon, the golden light that had once warmed the Silver Fork diner had turned into a bruised amber glow. Shadows from the birch trees outside stretched long across the gravel, the kind that always made Jack Morgan uneasy. It was the hour before trouble, the quiet in-between when the world seemed to hold its breath. Inside, the diner was still. Martha had wiped down every table twice, her hands restless with worry she refused to speak aloud. Rex lay near the door, his head resting on his paws, but his ears twitched every few seconds, listening to a rhythm no one else could hear. Jack sat at the counter, sipping the last of his coffee. The caffeine no longer mattered. It was the ritual that steadied him. The silence was interrupted by the faint crunch of tires outside, slow and deliberate. 2 car doors shut almost in unison. Rex lifted his head, growling low, his tail stiff as a rod. The bell over the door chimed, but this time the sound carried no welcome. 2 police officers entered. The first was Sergeant Tom Miller, a man in his mid-40s with the thick build of someone who had long ago traded physical training for authority. His face was ruddy, the veins on his nose spidered from years of alcohol and ego. His eyes, small and gray, had a sharpness born not of intelligence, but suspicion. A faded wedding ring hung loose on his finger, and the corner of his uniform shirt was stained with coffee. Everyone in town knew Miller's story. Once a promising officer, now a man content to serve whoever could keep him comfortable. The Briggs family had done that generously. Trailing behind him was Officer Riley Cooper, barely 24. She was tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and fair skin that turned pink at the first sign of stress. Her auburn hair was tied into a neat bun under her cap, though a few rebellious strands had escaped. Her hazel eyes held the eagerness of someone who still believed in the badge, though they flickered with uncertainty the moment she entered the diner. She had been in the force only a few months, fresh out of the academy, still carrying the kind of hope that hadn't yet learned how to hide. Martha stepped forward instinctively, her voice trembling. "Officers, is something wrong?" Miller didn't answer her. His gaze was fixed on Jack, the calculating stare of a man who had already made up his mind. "Afternoon, sir," he said, his tone falsely polite. "We've had a complaint about a violent incident here earlier today." Jack didn't move. His cup was still in his hand, eyes calm but unreadable. "A complaint?" "That's right," Miller said, pulling out a folded paper. "Assault and intimidation, and according to this, You used a dangerous animal during the confrontation. His smirk widened. That would be your dog, I assume. Rex stood now, slow and deliberate, ears flat, body between his handler and the officers. That's not true. Martha blurted out. That young man, Evan Briggs, he was the one who... Miller raised a hand to silence her. Ma'am, I'd advise you to keep quiet. Making false statements can complicate things. His words carried the lazy confidence of a man who had delivered that threat many times before. Riley shifted beside him, uncomfortable. Sergeant, she said quietly, shouldn't we? We're following procedure, Miller snapped. Now, Mr. Morgan, you're under arrest for aggravated assault and for keeping a dangerous animal off leash in a public establishment. Jack finally set his cup down. His voice remained low, steady. You don't want to do this. Miller's smile was thin. Oh, I think I do. Hands where I can see them. Riley looked between the two men, her pulse quickening. Something in Jack's expression didn't match the report she'd been given. He wasn't angry or defiant. He was disappointed, almost resigned. Rex's growl deepened. The hair along his spine bristled. Jack placed a hand on the dog's shoulder without looking down. Easy, he murmured. Rex went still, but didn't break his stare from the sergeant's gun. Martha moved around the counter, panic rising in her chest. You can't take him. He didn't hurt anyone. He was protecting me. Miller's eyes flashed with irritation. Ma'am, step back. His voice boomed across the diner, loud enough that the window panes quivered. Jack took one step forward, placing himself between Martha and the sergeant. That's enough, he said quietly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Riley could hear her own heartbeat. She noticed the way Jack's stance shifted, subtle, balanced, defensive, but non-aggressive. It was the stance of someone trained to control chaos, not cause it. She also noticed the faint scar along his jawline, the squared posture, and the military precision in the way his hands moved, measured, not fearful. Something about him didn't fit the image of a violent suspect. Sergeant, she tried again, maybe we should verify the footage before... Miller cut her off. The footage has already been reviewed. The Briggs boy provided video evidence, clear as day. Riley bit her lip. Still, I said that's enough, he barked, the veins on his neck bulging. Jack's gaze drifted toward the window. The light was fading fast, the sky shifting to the dull blue of approaching evening. He took a slow breath and looked back at Miller. If you're going to arrest me, he said, then do it, but you don't draw your weapon in front of him. Miller sneered. I'll decide what's safe. Riley saw Miller's hand twitch toward his holster and instinctively stepped slightly forward. Sergeant, please. But Miller was already motioning to her. Control the animal first. Jack's muscles tightened. You touch him. He'll react. Let me handle it. The sergeant ignored him, pulling a long catch pole from behind his belt. The metal loop gleamed under the fluorescent light. It was meant for strays, not service dogs. Rex growled, a deep vibrating warning that seemed to shake the floor. Jack knelt slowly, lowering himself to the dog's eye level. Rex, he whispered, voice soft but commanding. Down. The German shepherd's body trembled with restrained energy. Then, against instinct, he obeyed, lowering his head to the ground. His amber eyes never left the officer's gun. Martha couldn't watch. She turned away, pressing her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Miller stepped forward, his boots heavy on the linoleum. Get on your knees, Mr. Morgan, hands behind your head. Jack complied without hesitation. He had learned long ago that fighting a corrupt system required patience, not fists. As Miller cuffed his wrists, twisting them tighter than necessary, Jack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The steel bit into his skin. Riley moved to the side, holding the leash for Rex. Her hands shook as she slipped the catch-pole around the dog's neck. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered under her breath. Rex whined softly, confused but compliant. She met Jack's eyes briefly, and what she saw there unsettled her. There was no anger, only calm, and a strange kind of sorrow that made her stomach twist. Miller hauled Jack to his feet with a shove. "You're making this worse for yourself," he muttered. Jack's voice was quiet, level. "No, you are." Rex barked once, sharp and desperate, as Riley guided him toward the door. The sound cut through Martha's heart. She covered her mouth to stifle a sob. As they stepped outside, the dying sunlight caught in Rex's fur, turning it gold against the shadows. The police car door slammed, metal echoing against the valley. Jack was pushed into the back seat of the cruiser, the cuffs cold against his wrists. Martha stood in the doorway, helpless. "He's not what you think he is," she shouted. "You're making a mistake." Miller didn't turn. "Maybe," he said, opening the driver's door, "but it's not my mistake to care about." Riley lingered for a second, looking back at the old woman. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I'll make sure he's treated right." Then she got in beside Miller, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. Inside the car, Jack leaned his head back against the seat, exhaling slowly. Rex barked again from the other vehicle, the sound muffled by steel and glass. Jack closed his eyes. "It's all right, boy," he murmured. "Stay calm." The cruiser pulled away, dust rising behind it like smoke. The sign of the Silver Fork Diner grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it vanished completely. The trap had been sprung, and somewhere in the distance, the river carried the last reflection of daylight away, like a promise lost to the current. The station was small and old, built from red brick that had long since darkened to the color of rust. Inside, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee, disinfectant, and the heavy weight of authority left too long unchecked. Jack Morgan sat in a metal chair bolted to the floor, one wrist cuffed to a steel ring. The fluorescent light above him buzzed intermittently, flickering shadows across the interrogation room. His gray-blue eyes were half-lidded, calm but alert, the kind of stillness that came not from peace, but from years of learning how to wait in dangerous silence. His mind replayed every detail of the last few hours, the smug tone of Sergeant Miller, the look of guilt in Officer Riley's eyes, the muffled bark of Rex as the door slammed shut. He'd been in tighter corners before, under worse odds, but this time there was something different. He wasn't on foreign soil. This was supposed to be home. In the next room, behind the glass, Sergeant Tom Miller was pacing, jaw tight and shirt collar damp with sweat. He looked like a man trying to convince himself he was still in control. He had removed his hat, revealing thinning hair slicked back in an attempt to appear composed. On the desk beside him lay a half-empty mug of cold coffee and a file labeled Morgan, Jack, Assault and Endangerment. Across the room sat Chief Raymond Denton, a man in his late 50s with a trim gray mustache and the look of someone who had once cared deeply about justice, but had long since traded it for convenience. His suit strained at the waist, and a tired badge hung around his neck like a chain of resignation. Denton was a man who survived by not noticing the things that should have bothered him. Miller slammed his palm against the table. "He's playing it cool in there, you know, the type that thinks silence makes him smarter." Denton exhaled slowly, adjusting his tie. "You've made your arrest, Tom. Just process him. No need to turn this into a show." Miller scoffed. "You think Briggs Sr.'s going to sit quiet if I let this guy walk? That family practically paid for this station's roof." Denton's eyes flicked toward the door. "Watch yourself, Sergeant. The last thing I need is a lawsuit." But Miller wasn't listening anymore. He stared through the glass at Jack, his expression hardening. He thinks he's better than us. You can see it in his eyes. Meanwhile, down the narrow corridor lined with aging lockers and a single humming vending machine, Officer Riley Cooper sat at her desk. Her face was pale under the fluorescent lights, freckles stark against her skin. She had been shaking since they brought Jack in. Her partner's report didn't match what she'd seen. She had heard fear in Martha Wilkins' voice, not aggression. Something about this entire case itched at the part of her conscience she still trusted. As she sorted through the incoming evidence logs, Riley noticed a small USB drive tucked between the files, a drive with a handwritten label, Silver Fork Footage. It was the one Martha had slipped into Riley's hand just before the arrest, whispering, "Don't let them erase the truth." Riley hesitated only a second before plugging it into her computer. The footage opened grainy but clear enough. The diner empty except for Martha behind the counter. Then Evan Briggs stormed in, his voice raised, his arms slamming down on the counter. Riley leaned forward, volume low. The scene played out brutally honest, Evan taunting, Martha pleading, Jack standing to intervene only when Evan threw the money and threatened her. There was no violence from Jack, no attack, no sign of the supposed dangerous dog. It was as clear as daylight who the aggressor was. Riley's heart pounded. She glanced around. No one was watching. She copied the video to her personal drive. Her phone buzzed, a notification from the town's community app. Already people were talking about the arrest at Silver Fork. Rumors were spreading like wildfire, fed by the Briggs family's version of the story. Her jaw tightened. She'd joined the force to protect people like Martha, not silence them. She uploaded the uncut footage anonymously to the local community forum. The file processed, then went live. Within 10 minutes, comments began flooding in. "That's not assault. That's defense. They arrested the wrong man. Who's protecting the Briggs money now?" Across town, phones started ringing. Local reporters, military veterans, and civic activists. The story was spreading faster than anyone could contain. Back in the interrogation room, Miller entered carrying a clipboard. He tossed it on the table in front of Jack. "Here's your statement," he said, voice dripping with false authority. "Sign it, and maybe you'll be out by morning." Jack didn't look up. "What's it say?" "That you admit to provoking the incident, that your dog was acting aggressively, that you'll pay a fine and move along quietly." Jack raised his eyes, the calm there sharper than any anger. "No." Miller leaned closer, breath sour with coffee. "I'm giving you an out. Take it before this gets worse." Jack met his stare evenly. "I've been through worse." The sergeant's jaw flexed. "You think being tough impresses me? You're not in the desert anymore, soldier. You're in my house." Jack tilted his head slightly. "Then you should keep it cleaner." For a second, Miller's face darkened with rage, but before he could respond, a commotion erupted in the main hall. Shouts, hurried footsteps, the metallic echo of doors swinging open. The sergeant's hand went to his sidearm out of habit. The door burst open, and Riley appeared, her cheeks flushed. "Sir," she said, breathless, "you need to see this." Miller frowned. "I told you. Now," she insisted, her voice trembling but firm. "It's all over the town network. The footage from the diner, it's gone viral. Everyone's seen it." The chief appeared behind her, holding a phone to his ear, his face pale. "The mayor just called. So did the county commissioner and the Navy." The word froze Miller in place. "The Navy?" Before anyone could respond, a heavy rumble filled the parking lot outside. Engines, multiple, the kind of synchronized hum only military vehicles made. Within moments, the entire building shook under the weight of boots and authority. The station's front doors opened, and Colonel Samuel Harris stepped inside. He was in his late 50s, tall and powerfully built, his posture so straight it could have been measured with a ruler. His uniform was immaculate, his medals precise against the dark blue fabric. A scar traced down his left cheek, a pale line earned from a mission long past. His presence filled the room like thunder preceding a storm. Behind him were two Navy MPs, their expressions unreadable. "Where is he?" Harris's voice was low, carrying an unmistakable command. Chief Denton hurried forward, sweating. "Colonel Harris, I can explain." "I'm not interested in explanations," Harris said sharply. His cold eyes swept the room until they landed on Jack through the glass. "That man is Commander Jack Morgan, United States Navy SEAL, active duty. You've just unlawfully detained a decorated officer and confiscated government property, a K-9 ranked lieutenant." Miller's mouth went dry. "Sir, there was a report." Harris turned his gaze on him like a blade. "Do I look like a man who cares about your report, Sergeant?" The room went silent. Riley stood frozen near the door, her heart pounding. She had never seen raw authority like this before, real power, not the small-town imitation she worked under. Harris pointed toward the interrogation room. "Uncuff him, now!" Miller fumbled with his keys, his hands trembling as he stepped into the room. Jack looked up calmly, the faintest trace of relief flickering in his eyes when he saw the colonel. The handcuffs clicked open. Harris entered behind Miller, his tone softening slightly. "Commander." "Sir," Jack replied, standing to attention despite the circumstances. Harris gave a curt nod, his voice quieter but no less certain. "We'll handle the rest from here." As they stepped into the hallway, the building buzzed with whispers. Riley watched as the MPs moved past, their boots thudding in precise rhythm. She met Jack's gaze briefly. He gave her a single nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. For the first time that night, she believed justice might still have a heartbeat. The morning after the storm broke, sunlight returned to the valley with the soft gold of redemption. The Columbia River shimmered like a sheet of moving glass, and the Silver Fork Diner, its paint chipped, its sign still crooked, seemed to stand prouder than ever. Justice, once a rumor whispered between fear and hope, had finally found its voice. At the police station, the air was heavy with the silence that follows humiliation. Sergeant Tom Miller sat at his desk, stripped of his badge and gun, staring at the dull reflection of his own face in a half-empty whiskey glass. The man who once strutted through town believing he owned it now looked hollow, unshaven, and 50 pounds heavier than regret. Chief Raymond Denton stood beside him, reading the disciplinary report aloud in a tone drained of authority. "Sergeant Miller, you are hereby relieved of duty for abuse of power, falsification of evidence, and obstruction of justice." The words landed like nails in a coffin. Miller didn't respond. He just rubbed his eyes with calloused hands, muttering something no one wanted to hear. He had made a choice, one he could no longer bury under excuses or the Briggs family's shadow. In a separate office, Evan Briggs sat with his wrists cuffed, wearing a navy suit that no longer looked expensive. His blonde hair was disheveled, his face pale. Across from him, Detective Laura Grant, a woman in her late 30s with cropped black hair and a no-nonsense expression, was finishing the paperwork. She had sharp green eyes, the kind that noticed everything, and the faint shadow of a scar across her chin, rumored to be from a knife fight during her time working undercover in Portland. "You're lucky," she said coolly, flipping a page. "Your father's lawyers are already spinning this as a misunderstanding. But that video of you harassing a 70-year-old woman, that's going to follow you." Evan shifted, lips tightening. "You don't understand. She provoked me." Laura's glare stopped him mid-sentence. "Save it. You tried to frame a Navy SEAL, and you lost. Next time you think money makes you untouchable, look in the mirror and ask yourself what it bought you today." By noon, word of the arrest had spread through the entire town. Locals gathered in small groups outside the diner, shaking their heads, exchanging stories, their faith in justice rekindled. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, cinnamon, and gratitude. The diner buzzed softly with the sound of chatter and laughter, life returning after weeks of fear. Jack Morgan sat at his usual corner booth, no longer a stranger, but the quiet center of attention. His broad shoulders were relaxed, though his eyes still carried that calm vigilance that never truly left a soldier. The faint bruise around his wrist, where the cuffs had bitten skin, was the only visible mark left from the ordeal. Across from him sat Officer Riley Cooper, now out of uniform, wearing a light denim jacket and jeans, her auburn hair loose for the first time since he met her. The exhaustion from the past days had softened her, but there was new strength behind her hazel eyes. She smiled awkwardly, stirring her coffee. "You're kind of famous now," she said. "Half the town wants to buy you breakfast." Jack chuckled, the sound quiet but genuine. "They can save their money. I've had enough diner food to last a deployment." Riley laughed. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner." "You did what you could," Jack replied. "That took guts." Her gaze shifted to Rex, lying near the window with his head resting on one paw, eyes half closed, but alert. His fur gleamed under the sun, the gold and sable shining like armor. Children from a nearby table were sneaking him bits of bacon, and he accepted them with royal composure. "He's incredible," Riley said softly. "You two, how long have you worked together?" 5 years, Jack said. "I was stationed overseas when they assigned me a K-9 partner. He saved my life twice. I owed him this quiet life." He paused, looking out the window where the river sparkled. "Guess peace doesn't come easy for people like us." At that moment, the door opened, and Colonel Samuel Harris entered, his presence still commanding even in civilian clothes, dark slacks, a pressed shirt, and the same disciplined posture. The crowd instinctively fell quiet as he approached. "Commander," he greeted, extending a hand. Jack rose and shook it firmly. "Good work holding your ground," Harris said. "Washington's already cleared your record. They're calling it a procedural misunderstanding." His tone made it clear what he thought of that phrase. Martha Wilkins came from the kitchen then, her steps slow but sure. She wore a floral apron and carried a fresh apple pie, the steam rising like memory. Her hair, tied back neatly, caught the sunlight, and for the first time in months, her eyes were bright. "Colonel, Commander, Officer," she said warmly, setting the pie on the counter. "You all came just in time. The least I can do is feed the people who gave me back my life." The diner filled with applause, hesitant at first, then louder, echoing through the room. Jack tried to protest, but Martha took his hand in both of hers. Her skin was paper thin, her grip firm. "You reminded me," she said softly. "That kindness still wins, even when the world forgets it should." Riley blinked quickly, pretending to study her coffee. Harris gave a curt nod, eyes glinting with restrained emotion. "The Navy takes care of its own," he said. As the afternoon waned, the celebration turned gentle. Locals shared stories, laughter mixed with tears. Outside, the sun dipped low over the river, casting long golden streaks across the water. Rex lay by the fireplace that Martha kept burning even in mild weather, his eyes half-lidded, tail flicking softly in his sleep. The room had the quiet warmth of a home reclaimed. Jack leaned back in his seat, watching Martha wipe down the counter, Harris chatting with townsfolk, and Riley laughing with a group of children who were still sneaking scraps to Rex. There was a rare peace in that scene, the kind that didn't roar, but settled quietly into the bones. When the crowd began to thin, Jack stepped outside. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and orange. He stood by his old Ford, hands in his pockets, breathing in the scent of pine and river water. The door creaked behind him. Riley stepped out, her jacket slung over one arm. "Heading out?" she asked. "Yeah," Jack said. There's a cemetery up north I still need to visit. Someone I owe a few words to." She nodded slowly. "You'll come back, though? This town could use a few more good men." Jack smiled faintly. "The world's got more good people than bad. They just need someone to remind them." Riley grinned, and for a moment the weight between them lifted. She reached down to pat Rex, who had padded out beside Jack. "Take care of him," she said. "He usually takes care of me," Jack replied. They stood there in silence as the sun sank behind the trees, the river glimmering like a trail of light leading toward tomorrow. Finally, Jack opened the truck door. Rex jumped inside, curling onto the passenger seat. Jack paused, glancing back at the diner, where Martha stood by the window, watching them with a smile. "Mission accomplished," Jack said softly. He started the engine. The truck rumbled to life. The road stretched ahead, winding along the water, bathed in the glow of the setting sun. As they drove away, the Silver Fork diner grew smaller in the mirror, but the warmth of it, its light, followed them long after the town disappeared behind the hills. Every act of courage, no matter how small, creates ripples that can reach someone lost in the dark. The light by the river reminds us that even in a world clouded by injustice and fear, kindness and integrity still have the power to restore faith in others and in ourselves. Like Jack and Rex, we are all called to stand up when silence feels easier, to defend what's right when no one else will, and to believe that compassion is stronger than cruelty. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that goodness still exists in quiet corners of the world, please share this video so others can feel the same light. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what loyalty means to you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, because somewhere out there, another story is waiting to remind us that hope never truly disappears.